And now for more on the situation in the Middle East, we're joined today by Matthew David Jenkins, Associate Professor at the Department of Political Science at Gyeongsang National University. Professor Jenkins, thanks for coming on today.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So, despite Trump saying negotiations will resume on Monday and threatening that these new talks are Iran's last chance to make a deal, there's no indication that any new talks have been scheduled. So how do you think the negotiations will play out?
Yeah, so I think what we're going to see is more of indirect negotiations, right? You're not going to see a lot of direct, sit-downs with Iran probably in the near future, as Iran has already stated, has no intention of talking with the United States. But that doesn't mean that they're not negotiating, right? Oman is a trusted partner for both countries, and it's certainly possible that there could be, non-visible negotiations going on through Oman, and I suspect that's what's happening at the moment, right? How's the negotiations going to play out? Again, I don't really see a big settlement on the horizon. That seems unlikely at this point, given that the differences in what the two standpoints of the two countries are in terms of what's actually happening, right? With America saying, "Yeah, we're gonna, talks are imminent, right? We're going through talks right now," and Iran saying that no, and nothing's happening. So that's a pretty big gap. And so we'll see what happens with this Oman agreement, and we'll see what comes out of that. But as of right now, I don't expect anything to change much, in terms of the big picture.
Right, and Trump also said he's calling off a planned attack on Iran. Some reports suggest the United States is running low on weapons. What's really behind the decision?
There's probably multiple things. I don't see any credible evidence that the U.S. is actually running out of weapons. It's true that we're supplying weapons. We've been supplying weapons to the Ukraine for years now, and also to giving military support to Israel. And so, I mean, there are some strains on the weapons supply, but I don't think the United States is actually out of weapons. Massive, major stockpiles of all sorts of weapons, Patriot missiles and offensive missiles and things like that. So I think it's really more about just resource management, right? On the one hand, if the United States is going to continue to pursue its aggressive stance towards Iran, it's going to need weapons. At the same time, it's not like the other potential conflict areas have disappeared, right? China is still there. North Korea is still there. There are still a number of places where you want to have contingency plans put in place. You want to have weapons available in those areas too, should another conflict arise, right? And so I think it's more about just strategic management rather than a weapons stockpile issue.
I see. And Saudi state media said the country's crown prince pushed for de-escalation during a call with Trump. Earlier in the conflict, Saudi Arabia reportedly urged the United States to ramp up attacks on Iran. So why is it now urging both sides to find an end to the conflict?
Yeah, so Saudi Arabia has multiple motivations, multiple interests, right? It's true that Saudi Arabia is not really best friends with Iran. It certainly would like to see Iran's offensive capabilities weakened. It would like to see its military weakened. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard would like to see that weakened. And to a large extent, to a certain extent, that has been achieved, right? The U.S. did weaken Iran's defenses. It weakened its military. Already decapitated, right, the head of the Islamic Republic. I think from Saudi Arabia's perspective, they would at this point, I think they're pretty happy with what has been achieved, and they would like to prevent a broadening of the war, right? As the closing of the Strait of Hormuz is obviously affecting Saudi Arabia directly too. So it's not. Would like to see this conflict resolved, and certainly would not welcome a widening of the war, right? And so I think that's kind of where it sits right at this point.
Right, and like you mentioned, Iran's only negotiations are with Oman, and Tehran says the negotiations on the Strait of Hormuz are entering their final stages. So what role is Oman actually playing in mediating this conflict?
Yeah, so like I said earlier, Oman is kind of playing a Switzerland type role. It's sort of a neutral intermediary. So it is playing a very important role in the negotiations, even if it's not always visible to the public, right? There are back channels, right? Oman does serve as sort of a indirect intermediary between the two countries, and so the United States can has an idea for a compromise or has an idea for some kind of proposal. It can pass that to Oman and then sort of test the waters to see if it's feasible, right, in their perspective, and the same thing for the Iranian side. And of course, the Strait of Hormuz, the waters there are bordered by the two. They're mostly Iran's territorial waters and also Oman. So those are the two countries that are most directly implicated. So yeah, I think it's going to be play a very important role in terms of what the actual is. It really at the final stages? I mean, who knows, right? It's impossible really to tell. Suppose they do reach an agreement, that will not, that would be a more limited agreement about logistical things like shipping lanes and stuff like this, and whether there would be some kind of whether Iran would actually control the passage of ships to the strait, like as Trump mentioned earlier. Is it going to be a fee? Like, who's going to be actually in control of that? I mean, it's impossible for that to get settled when they're still at war with the United States, right? So it's unclear exactly how much of an impact that deal could have if it's really just between Oman and Iran. So I don't see that bringing a major resolution to the conflict in the meantime and in the near-term future either. So that we'll have to see how the U.S. responds to a deal if it is reached.
I see. I guess we'll have to see how that goes. All right, Professor Jenkins, thank you so much for coming on today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.